Dad. He was so proud of his upbringing, a small hamlet, Saskatchewan boy from a German background. His grandfather Frank brought the family to Canada in 1910, and Frank walked from Moose Jaw to Flintoff to claim their family farm. Today it is over a 1.5 hour drive. How long would that have taken to get there by foot? His parents, Joe and Margaret, had 5 children. Dad was the middle child. His memories growing up were precious to him, and he shared them regularly with us. He remembered getting his first set of glasses at the age of 6, and he found out that trees had individual leaves. He and his brother Leon, when they could drive, spent weekends at various dances across the area, often getting home in time to get 2 to 3 hours of sleep before their father rattled the milk pails to wake them up. Grandma and Grandpa wanted a good education for their children, and they had a teacher come in for the 4 kids who taught them in a one-room schoolhouse. They also learned by correspondence. When it came time for high school, they had to go to Assiniboia, and they lived with their grossmutter Hartman. Dad remembers getting home from school, and Marlene, Carl, I think it was, and Dad fighting over the heel ends of a new loaf of bread great-grandmother had made them. After the 2 ends were gone, the third person ended up cutting off the bottom. He left home at the tender age of 17 to go to the University of Saskatchewan and begin his studies to be an agricultural engineer. In this he took great pride. He was exacting and held himself to a higher standard in his studies. He met lifelong friends, joined the Glee Club, choir, among other clubs. More dancing and meeting of friends happened in between his studies. Dad told us of many stories about batching it in Saskatoon with his friend Harold Engel, and I think Larry Speece. During this time, he saw a pretty girl at a dance with the St. Paul Nursing School. Patricia Ann McEwen ended up being his wife on June 29th, 1963. They settled in Lethbridge, Alberta, with Mom nursing at St. Michael's Hospital and Dad working at Oliver Irrigation. Their first child was born in March 1964, a mere 8 months, 1 week after the wedding. Shelley was 3 weeks early, but still, Grandma McEwen started counting backwards on the calendar. Years later, I got a t-shirt that read, "Made in Saskatchewan," from my dad, as I was a honeymoon baby, and they honeymooned in the Cypress Hills. Mom and Dad lived in a very small suite apartment in Lethbridge, close to downtown. They had about 6 inches between the bed and the crib. So when Mom got pregnant with Juanita, and I was only 10 months old, they had to look at different options. The one they chose was a move to Medicine Hat, with Dad getting a job with Alberta Agriculture in the Irrigation Division. Juanita was 1 month old when they moved. There again they met people like Marie and Leslie Turnbull, who became more like family, Michael sharing the same birthday as their adopted daughter Marnie. Dad still kept in touch with Marnie until his passing. They made lifelong friends. Is this a theme? In the neighborhood of their first home on Mitchell Crescent in Medicine Hat, Joe and Ann Bear, or Doe and Ann, as Juanita called them, they, along with their daughter, Robin, became integral in our lives and became my sponsor for confirmation. Mom and Dad got involved in things like curling, while we girls ran feral in the rink. Dad curling until his accident in 1995. They also hosted block parties, dances in our house in Medicine Hat, expecting us to go to bed and sleep while the guests made their own music to dance to. A washtub bass, a fiddle, Dad's accordion, and Mrs. Maher's guitar. That 15th Street Northeast house was an important part of our upbringing because of the little green space across from it. We learned to ride our bikes by going around and around that park. It provided many opportunities for exercise, as Michael, as a small boy, only in his diaper, but sometimes naked, would get outside and run away from Mum. He would run to the park and down the street, and Juanita and Shelley would have to go get him. Like, how embarrassing. Michael was born in 1969. We girls were baptized at St. Pat's in Lethbridge and Michael at St. Pat's in Medicine Hat, with Barb and Larry Speece, good friends, becoming his godparents. In 1972, Dad got transferred to Sherwood Park to work with the Alberta Agriculture, but not the Irrigation Division. We spent the first month in a hotel with a kitchenette while our house was being finished. He worked with a gentleman named Robert Onsell, who lived behind us, kitty corner with no alley. Dad, being persuasive and the friendly neighbor that he was, talked our left-hand neighbor into letting us build a gate into their back corner with another gate into Onsell's yard, so we didn't have to go all the way around the block to visit. We had lots of Grey Cup parties with those friends. Being so close to actual government brought extra stress of politics, and Dad developed high blood pressure. This eventually led to him asking for a transfer away, which started his career at the Lethbridge Research Station with the Irrigation Division in 1976. We settled in our home in Coaldale in a brand new house. Coaldale wasn't welcoming in those days, so Mom and Dad really didn't make friends until they involved themselves in things: curling, Girl Guides, baseball, and finding true friends with their bridge group and Ellen and Ray Wagner, who moved to Coaldale a year later. After attending Mass at St. Ambrose, we felt like we had stepped back into pre-Vatican II. Michael, wondering why the fire alarm was going off during the consecration of the Eucharist, and Shelley, dismayed at not being allowed to be an altar server anymore. Dad saw that there was no Knights of Columbus Council at the church and got busy organizing one with Hank Lohughes and Eugene Waters. Dad, having been a knight since he was 18 years of age, wasn't putting up with his parish being without a council. Dad's Knights of Columbus was so important to him. He became a Grand Knight, then a District Deputy, a DD as Mum would call it. He went to state convention twice and became a 4th-degree knight. He still has his tux for that event. Dad and Mum loved to dance and went to dances as often as they could. They taught us to dance like you were from Saskatchewan, and that, my friends, is a good thing. Dad learned from an early age and a musical family to love music, singing harmony, playing accordion by ear, and he loved listening to CBC and classical music. We remember him playing Tiptoe Through the Tulips, but his version. His version involved a progression from tiptoeing to walking, trotting, running, stomping, and then finally monster mashing through the tulips.
Dad and Mom loved camping. They started in an old canvas tent and progressed to a tent trailer, and then, when we were all gone, to a camper van. Working for the government had its advantages. One being the ability to reserve group camps early. Dad managed to make Syncline Group Camp by Westcastle our normal Labor Day camping spot. His university buddy John Weeb and his wife Anita and family joined us, plus invited guests. We lived for those weekends year after year. Dad became a father-in-law in 1983. Having known John Lohughes and worked with him, he trusted his daughter with this young man. Crazy, eh? 7-year difference. The first grandchild arrived when Dad was only 45 years old. Sean was spoiled for 3 years until Brandon and Katie arrived. Juanita married Wayne Erdos in 1987, and they had Brandon in 1988. After this, the families grew regularly. Over these years, Dad took a university class in German, did defensive driving courses, of which we were the benefit via backseat driving tips, even up to 2 weeks before he passed. You have a heavy foot, you know. He learned how to do electrical work to finish a bedroom, a bathroom, downstairs at our 1820 11th Street house. He maintained all of his own vehicles and kept meticulous logs on his vehicles. Some of my happiest times were helping Dad with this. In 1995, January 11th, his life was changed in an instant. Coming home from an St. Mary's River Irrigation District meeting with 3 passengers on a highway covered with freezing ice, he was hit by a young, inexperienced driver. For the first time, while after his discharge, he was limited in his ability to be active and kept amused by his last grandson, Corey. Corey was his little buddy and truly helped Dad with his healing process. Dad did eventually regain more strength, and he continued to golf and travel, and he tried to curl with the stick. But his dancing days were over. We know that was hard on him. He was still very busy with all the church, live-in, and Knights of Columbus activities, taking the sitting jobs that needed to be done. Bridge group was still a monthly pleasure, but instead of an all-evening affair and lots of drinking, the monthly games became afternoon or early evening, little drinking, and go home early. The food, however, was always there. 2002, Dad meticulously planned their new one-story home. He specifically asked Renee Van de Vendel if they could handle him being on top of their every move. Guess what? Dad made another friend with Renee and his employees survived. They continued to travel, making a once-in-a-lifetime trip with Jim and Chris Wilson to the Yukon, where they golfed at midnight, June 21st. Before the accident, Dad and Mom traveled to Hawaii and Rome. As they grew older, more of Mom's care fell to Dad. Isabella was the surprise of their grandparenthood. Dad, finally being at home and recovered, he could enjoy the baby stage with one grandchild. He purposely bought a tea set to have tea time with Isabel. During these years, Dad and Mom babysat and picked up sick kids from school and drove to dances and other events. After Mom's death in 2019, Dad was free to actually do things, but age was creeping up. He did one snowbird stint with his friend Chris Figgenshaw. He continued hosting our annual Pie Day, mostly because he was a recipient of pies. He continued supporting charities and charitable events, especially if there was food involved. He made sure the government wasn't getting his money by giving it away to charities every Christmas. He taught us about respecting Remembrance Day, how to stand at attention, and to sing O Canada.
Since last December, Dad became noticeably thinner. We thought it was because he was eating Meals on Wheels, and he liked to eat, and they didn't leave him much. But nope. It was cancer that he had had for decades, probably. It just caught up with him and hit a turning point. He became more tired and wasn't his outgoing self anymore. He smiled less, laughed less, and told fewer stories, and sang fewer "there's a song about that" songs. He fed his mom meals when she was sick in the home, and he always said he didn't want that for us. And because the house was built for handicap purposes, he wanted to be carried out on a slab from that house. He got both his wishes. He's dancing now in heaven and singing praises to God and playing his accordion, not a harp.